created for finance leaders to connect and exchange on the most important topics affecting finance teams in 2023. With that, today, our objective here is to find out how great finance leaders drive decision-making and build exceptional teams to execute on these goals at each stage, from startups to public companies. That said, this discussion is meant to be as interactive as possible. So I really want to get all of you involved in this discussion. So we created a quick poll to see what you guys want to learn more about, what you guys want to hear more about. So let's take 1 minute really quickly for everyone to drop in their answers. It's really fast. There's only 3 to 4 choices, and then we will orient our discussion around that. Cool. I think we flatlined here. Awesome. So it's a big, I don't know if everyone can see this, but it's kind of a mix of everything, which is good news because we have questions that cover all 3. Awesome. So for the next 45 minutes, we have discussion topics to kick things off, and then we'll save 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So if you have questions along the way, please drop it in the Q&A tab. Everyone else in the conversation can see it, and people can actually upvote it so we know which questions you guys want to get answered, and then we will turn to them in order. Cool. So to kick things off on intros, my name is Megan Coe, and I'm a partner at Contrary, where I lead our later stage investing efforts. I was finance at DoorDash prior to this, and before that, Goldman Sachs in tech investment banking group, working alongside some really amazing CFOs. I would say both experiences gave me a much bigger appreciation for how much work goes beyond the scenes, and I've been fascinated by how great finance leaders affect change at different points in a company's maturity. So today, I am excited to welcome Taylor Otstot. Taylor is the Vice President of Finance at Dashlane and previously the Senior Director of Finance at GoDaddy, where he oversaw the company's transition from private to public. His work has spanned FP&A, investor relations, business analytics, and more. And maybe I'll hand it off to Taylor to introduce himself. Taylor, can you tell us more about your current role and your career path?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Megan, and thanks everyone for having us. This is really excited for this session today. And so my path, I originally went to school for psychology because I'm always interested in how people think and how they decide, but realized ultimately that the application of those principles was far more interesting than the theory. And so I started to go towards the accounting finance path. Started in public accounting, did that for a few years, realized that wasn't really for me. It was more about pointing out problems than solving them. And so I gradually started making my way over into the FP&A field. Like Megan said, I spent the better part of 8 years at GoDaddy. I joined about a year before they went public. I spent a lot of that time supporting the customer care organization, which when I started was around 1,500 sales and support guides in a few locations around the country, and helped scale that to over 6,000 people and to 20 plus locations around the world. And really appreciated what finance does as a growth lever and ultimately as a strategic partner for the business. The thing that separates finance from everything else is not only the vantage point that we have, but also the role that we play in helping to guide decisions. And that path ultimately then led me here to Dashlane, where I'm the VP of Finance. So for those of you who don't know, Dashlane is effectively the first line of defense for consumers and businesses. We provide password and credential management to 18 million users and 20,000 businesses globally. And it's just been a really great ride of doing the same kinds of thing of how do we empower people to make good decisions and drive businesses forward to ultimately serve our customers.
I love it. Awesome. It sounds like you've worked with various personas of finance leaders, really great finance leaders at amazing companies. So maybe we talk about the CFO persona first, since it seems like that's what everyone is most interested in. Question number one, it's no new news that the CFO persona has shifted from that of an accountant to an operational leader. I mean, our session talk is from reporting to reforming, but it's easier said than done. What skills do you think makes a great finance leader?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's worth starting by saying there's no one type of CFO. Different businesses need different types of CFOs, whether it's the strategic partner, the investment banker. There's so many different kinds, but the one common thread that really differentiates the great from the good is how they bring the numbers to life. The great finance leaders appreciate that numbers have soul. They're not ink on a page, they're not pixels on a screen. They are the culmination of the work of teams and businesses and customers all coming together to get to some kind of an outcome. And so the way that they do that, there's probably three different things that I would call out. One is that they are phenomenal storytellers. They breathe life into this and they talk about not just what the numbers are, but it talks about where the company was and where they're going and what it ultimately means. Second thing that they do is they are simplifiers. The world is so complex, and then right now there is so much data and so many things to look at. The great finance leaders are able to come in and really differentiate the signal from the noise and help folks focus on the things that matter, that are ultimately levers of the business versus the more extraneous things that might be shiny and interesting, but ultimately not impactful. The final thing that they do is they shape the future. It's not about just owning the numbers, but it's actually helping to drive the numbers to some conclusion. The good finance leaders can tell you what happened. They could, just like you could say, here's what the weather was. The great ones can tell you what to do because of the weather, right? It's not just that it's raining, so now make sure you bring an umbrella. And so when you put those three things together, be a great storyteller, simplify, and then ultimately help the team shape the future, you really start to see differentiated outcomes versus just the good finance leaders.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think for a lot of aspiring CFOs, you think it's all about the numbers, the technical skills, but in fact, it's kind of like a prerequisite, especially at the CFO level. It becomes a lot of the soft skills, getting people aligned with your vision and steering the ship towards that. I think one thing I might add in my experience at DoorDash and maybe even at GS is that the leaders I really respected had this one character, this one ability that was like a superpower. It was, I guess people call it zoom in, zoom out, and some people call it other words. But our COO at DoorDash, the CFO, he would dig into the models and be like, why is California negative contribution profit margin? And everyone would be like, we didn't see it. Why is refunds higher and all that stuff? But the next minute he was on a board meeting and explaining to the CEO like how the California will be fixed and all those things. And it's just so amazing because you can't build that context switching over 2 years, 4 years. It's something that you build through decades of experiencing like what's important and what's not. And it's something I personally still strive to work on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. My second question is trying to understand how the CFO's working relationship with other C-suite executives have changed in the last several years. And especially for you, you've been in the industry for almost 20 years now. You've probably seen that evolution and the CFO become a much stronger champion.
Yeah, and speaking from my experience, which has predominantly been software and SaaS, I suspect it's similar for other ones as well. Over time, we've seen the CFO become more of that strategic partner. The reliance has only gotten stronger as the uncertainty in the world has grown. And so if you think about what the CFOs are ultimately trying to balance, they're trying to balance short-term and long-term. They're trying to balance growth and profitability. There's all of these almost paradoxical things that you got to hold in each hand. And those things are also getting passed down to all of the other C-suite, but they don't necessarily have the vantage point or the ability to see all those things at the same time. So what that CFO then has to do is play a few different roles, more so than ever. One is just being a mediator, there's a lot of kind of conflicting things going on, right? Where there's a lot of joint ownership and the data may not necessarily be clear, right? Is the softening of sales a marketing challenge or a sales challenge or a product challenge? And if you just put those three leaders in a room, you probably aren't going to get to any resolution. And so having the CFO or the finance leader step in and help provide that simplified view of the world, that perspective to help align on a course of action may never be perfect, but that alignment becomes so critical. The second thing that they're doing is really playing the role of a sparring partner. More and more, I'm seeing the rest of the C-suite come and say, okay, what are you seeing? Like, here's what I'm seeing in data. I don't know what to make of it, or I think this will work, but I'm not sure, or what are the trade-offs even that I should be considering? And it really becomes an intellectual debate about what are the right trade-offs to make in this moment, because the answers aren't clear. For a long time, it was really hard not to grow. And now suddenly those things become hard. The hard things are hard, the easy things are hard. And so having someone there who appreciates all aspects of the business, but then can, to your point, zoom in to that particular area and help provide a counter perspective just to help folks think has become really, really valuable. The final thing that is just being a coach and helping to kind of drive the whole team to the conclusion, right? Business is a team sport. And the thing that's interesting about the finance role is we technically don't own any of the execution, right? We oversee it, we're responsible for it. And we certainly have to be able to identify what's going on. But when it gets down to boots on the ground, what are we going to go deliver? That's all the other team. So our role really is to coach and help guide. How are we going to do this in place? Sometimes that's making sure the right resources are there. Sometimes it's making sure the right structure or cadence is in place. But ultimately, it's making sure that the team can function at a high level and ultimately execute. Because what we're trying to balance or put all in place is there's a strategy, there's a structure to support the strategy, and there's execution. And any one of those things falls down, the stool tips over. So really the CFO, in partnership with the rest of the C-suite, is helping to make sure that those three things are strong and connected to each other.
Yeah, I love all of that. I think that's a good segue. I mean, there's so many points. First of all, I'll double click into. Maybe the first one is understanding how to win friends and influence people, CFO edition. So as I said, the CFO role is not just about the numbers, it's about people. But for finance leaders or finance teams that are still in the early innings of transitioning into that operational leader role, what are a few tips or advice that you'd give them to help kickstart this transition?
Yeah, so there's two things. One, depending on where you're transitioning from, if you're coming from a more structured role, say accounting, the first thing you have to start to accept is that there is no right answer. For a lot of accounting and even some finance things, there is an optimal answer. But as you get further and further into the operational world, that's just not true. Maybe abstractly there is, but realistically, there's no way to differentiate option A, B, and C, which one is better, because you're eventually going to commit to one plan of action and the other two plans aren't going to be clear as to whether or not that counterfactual is true. So starting to let go of the idea that there's a right answer, and instead there is one that is optimal and that you have folks aligned against. So then it really becomes about the partnership. And so for folks who are early in that transition, I really encourage them to build those partnership skills. As hokey as it sounds, I have like an ABCs of partnership that you can work through and to think through it. First off, you're going to aim to assist. Like, this is so critical, but coming in saying my job is to help my stakeholders be better. And that seems really basic, but a lot of times the trap that I see folks falling into is my job is to control the purse strings, or my job is to keep people in line. And the second that your intention goes from being a partner to being a guardrail, all of your actions change. That thought process changes how you interact with those teams, and they feel it. And the more you can actually be on their side, the more they're going to welcome you in, because they know ultimately you're doing what's best for everyone on behalf of them. Second thing would be is then building clear boxes. It is the value of a model, whatever kind of model you're building, is kept by the ability for the teams who are executing against it to understand it. And so if you build the most perfect model, but no one understands how it works, it's not a good model. Because ultimately they're like, well, what were the assumptions? Like, how is it supposed to deliver on those things? It'll be good until we start missing against that plan. And that goes even beyond just models, even processes, everything else. The more transparent you can be, and you can open up what would normally be a black box of how things work, you not only help folks feel more comfortable with what's going on, but they can also start to anticipate what's going to happen. And as you think about further in your career, where you're trying to scale yourself, having folks understanding the processes and what matters and how things work means you don't have to spend as much time explaining it. Last one then is making sure that you close the loop. And this is another one where folks are going to be asking you things all the time and circling back and making sure that the message was delivered, that folks know what the next steps are. Where execution tends to fall off is where there's a handoff and it's not as clean, right? If you think about a relay race and you just kind of throw the baton at the next person, they're not going to catch it. You want to make sure it's right in their hand and they're able to move with it. And so it could be as simple as just sitting down and saying, okay, here are the next steps that we need to go through. And it may even require that you have to follow up a couple of times and say, hey, how are these things going? It's not, again, to police folks, but it's to make sure that you're giving them every chance to succeed based on what they agreed upon. Because ultimately, these stakeholders have so many things going on all at once. You're there to help remind them, again, that simplifying concept of here are the things that are most important.
Yeah, I love all that. I think it just highlights that finance is a team sport over and over. And I remember walking into my DoorDash interview and I thought I was going to be asked like math numbers. And most of the questions were, in fact, like soft skills. How would you handle yourself in a situation where X stakeholder was frustrated and all those things? And I was like, what am I signing up for? But that is so important and 90% of the job. So maybe we shift gears a little bit into building teams or setting the right goals and system processes in place to execute on a company's strategy. So maybe we start with that. You know, Taylor, you are VP of Finance. You have hired numbers of people before. What do you look for in your hires to make sure that they can deliver on the vision that you have for your organization?
Yeah. So first and foremost, it's that partnership mindset. Regardless of the role that I'm picking up, it's someone who's going to come in and can put their ego aside, or at least supplement it a little bit with I'm here to play a team sport. I'm not here. The way that I usually frame it is, it's people coming in with the intention of being useful, not making an impact. Ultimately, being useful will have an impact, but when people come in and say, I'm here to make an impact, they're thinking about, here's what I'm going to do to make a difference. But what you really want to do is come in and say, how can I empower others to make a difference? And that just slight distinction makes a huge difference. And to your point around, it's not so much the technical, but the social skills. Stakeholders will have a lot of forgiveness for folks who have the right intentions, but sometimes make a mistake, versus those who don't have good intentions, right? Or at least have a stronger personality or more overbearing or whatever. You can forgive challenges that come up when you feel like you're playing on the same team. The second thing is being just intellectually curious. And that means, not just about the financial, but the actual business, like how things work. A lot of how I've trained, the younger folks on my team is I'll ask them, okay, what's the process that this team goes through to, handle a customer complaint? Or how did they come up with, the RevOps team come up with their sales forecast? And if they're just, well, I'm not sure, great, you have something to go find out. That may ultimately not help you do your job better, but you're going to appreciate what they go through more. It may eventually come down the road where that knowledge is going to help you think about something in your forecasting, your modeling, your budgeting. But more importantly, you're going to know what they go through on a day-to-day basis. So when you're coming to them for any kind of request or assistance, you know where they are in their world. If you know they have to go through these challenging Monday meetings where they're trying to assess the pipeline and the sales team, you're going to know, okay, don't bother them too much on Mondays because they're probably going to be a little cranky. And it's these just little things that make a huge difference, at least early on for the folks that are coming on. Those, quite frankly, are the two biggest things that I look for: is intellectually curious and folks who are coming in to be useful. Everything else, the industry experience, the technical skills, all those things are coachable. But those mindset things, those are really hard to change if folks come in with a different perspective.
That makes sense. And maybe a follow-up to that is I guess, like mental frameworks quickly. It's important to have a mental framework for handling hard decisions. As you mentioned, you measure things by impact of results, complexity of issue. But as a finance leader, you're also dealing with so many unknowns all the time. And it's important to be able to adapt to different circumstances, especially in this macro where data science really can't tell you that much. So how do you balance structure and flexibility in your roles, whether it's decision making or anything else?
Yeah, I think this is the hardest thing we're all going through right now, because the frequency of decisions, it just keeps increasing. And they're becoming more and more ad hoc. There was a time where I think everyone was in a mode. You did your forecast twice a year or quarterly, and the big decisions would happen around those timeframes. And a lot of companies right now are in a constant reforecasting mode. They're constantly reassessing what's going on and then trying to make quick decisions to change the outcomes over the next few months. So the few things that I try to keep in mind, in terms of flexibility or structure, the thing you really want to be structured on is what are the outcomes that matter? What are the ultimate targets that we're trying to move? What are the priorities for the company? And what are the things that we absolutely cannot sacrifice, right? You may be a company that says our number one priority is cash flow. We want to be cash flow positive. We want to maintain that optionality. So any decisions that come up that put that at risk would go through a different cycle than anything that is less cash flow impacting, right? So you can start to segment decisions in that way. The second structure thing you want to put around is who owns what decisions. What I've seen happen a lot is, kind of like kids soccer. If you've ever seen like little kids play soccer, they all go chase the ball and no one's really playing position. That happens a lot in business decisions too, where something comes up and then you've got representatives from every single team coming in and trying to decide at the same time, but no one knows who's supposed to kick the ball. So they all kind of run around it. So to the extent that you can at least establish, marketing owns decisions around, make it up, pricing and how they spend their dollars, and sales owns these things. As these things come up where there's urgency behind it and there really isn't time to put structure around the whole decision making, at least you know who's responsible and they know that they're responsible, and then they can decide based on their own risk assessment what types of decisions they want to make from there. Everything else, I think you kind of have to be a little bit flexible. And what's really important is you got to delegate more decisions than you feel comfortable with. If you try to keep every decision coming through you, you're just not going to get anything done. So having that prioritization set up of like, these are the things that we can't compromise on. These are the kinds of things that have to come through us. Everything else, there is an owner. We need to go through there. Maybe you have an escalation path set up, but quite honestly, most decisions should just more have a tracking methodology, because most decisions are a two-way door and you can come back. And maybe that's the other way to prioritize it, is say, is this something that you could change your opinion on or position on down the road? If so, we should move faster and not worry too much about it. Whereas things that are big decisions that are going to be harder to open that door back up, let's put a little more structure there.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I'm curious from your perspective, is there a right company stage for finance teams to start getting involved in these strategy and decision making that you talk about? I think conventional wisdom says that usually it's Series C and beyond, but you're seeing more and more teams, at least within the tech world, start building up that muscle in Series B, because your team can start suddenly caring about cash flow when they have never cared about it for 10 years, right? And so what do you think is the right time for that?
Yeah, so the ideal answer is as soon as possible, for the reason that you said. Just like companies build up tech debt, they build decision debt. And the longer you go without really being strategic about the type of decisions that you're making, the more of that decision debt you're going to have to pay down the road. Unwinding, using your example, a bunch of decisions that are negatively impacting cash flow are going to be painful, and it's going to take time, just like it's painful to take down a lot of tech debt. Practically, that's really hard. You think about what finance leaders are doing, they're typically in one of three modes. They're either in firefighting mode, fixing mode, or fortifying mode. And so like firefighting is like, there's a crisis, everyone, all hands on deck, this is kid soccer, right? Everyone just do what you can to get it working. Fixing then is like, okay, optimization stuff, like we have a little bit of a breather, let's just make sure that things are in place. And then fortifying is actually building up the structures that really allow for those scaling mechanisms, creating time. So my suggestion to finance leaders is when you're out of the firefighting mode, try to find as much fortifying time as you can, because those structures that you build up, whether it's automation or processes or whatever, it's going to free up some of the time for you to be able to be involved in those decisions. Even if you said like the ideal time is Series A, you should be in those decisions. Candidly, you probably don't have time. So you have to manufacture the time to do that. And the only way to do that is to be able to create some capacity to build up time-saving maneuvers down the road. And over time, then you start to see that ratio of firefighting, fixing, fortifying, moving more and more to the right. It'll never not have 0% firefighting. There's always some, but you want to try and keep pushing that ratio further and further to the right. And realistically, then I think that's probably where you're talking about Series C, because you're starting to build up a team where there isn't one or two finance people who are having to do everything. But leveraging even simple stuff of, in your Excel models, using VBAs, or even now with some of the AI stuff that's coming out, you're able to leverage tools to help create some time so that you can be in those key decisions, those one-way doors, or at least it's a two-way door. It's got a little bit of muscle you got to put to it to open back up, and try to be involved in those to help create capacity down the road and make sure your decision that doesn't become overburdensome by that Series C frame.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there is like a quadrant framework, which is important, not important, and urgent, not urgent.
Yes.
Where CFOs and a lot of leaders realize they spend their time is the kids soccer, which is important and urgent, but it isn't so important to build that infrastructure and spend time within the important, not urgent, such that your company and team can succeed in the long term. And maybe last question here. What are some systems, processes, or controls that are critical to put in place to enable this kind of decision making? So kind of the important, not urgent, but critical in the long term.
Yeah, so most of it is going to come down to pacing. So if you think about the broad questions that finance is going to answer, there are three ones. What happened? What does it mean? What are we going to do about it? The vast majority of time that finance teams spend their time on is on what happened. And that is a really critical aspect, but it's 1/3 of those questions that we need to answer. And really the more important ones are, what does it mean and what are we going to do about it? So as we think about those systems and processes, it's starting to build that up. Some of it may be investing in data, whether it's clear data, more accessible data, even just self-service mode. I saw a stat, I think it was in the FP&A Trends survey from this year. Over 50% of finance teams' time is spent just data grabbing and data validation. If you think about how much time you lose just trying to say like, okay, let me see where we are and just make sure that it's right before I publish it, there's a huge amount of leverage you can get if you're able to get that percentage down to even 40%, 30%, 25% of your time. So building those things out. And once you have the accessibility and reliability quotient solved, then it's about, okay, now how do you present it in a way that's simplified so folks know what to action against? I think a lot of companies, especially over the last few years, went through this dashboarding explosion where there's more dashboards than there is time. And you really need to figure out, okay, like what matters? What should I focus in on? And establishing that view early on, like what you should be looking at on a weekly basis? What should you be reacting to? Those are the things you want to start to build out and say, like, these are the highlight KPIs. There are going to be supplemental KPIs that you will use to diagnose what this dashboard says or these set of dashboards, but start here. And if all of this is good, you don't have to double click anymore. The final thing, and it's not really a process or a control, but it's really critical, is up-leveling your stakeholders on the financial knowledge. We talked about it a little bit before, but you want those team members to understand those financials as well as they can, so that they can help supplement you. You don't have to be in every discussion. You don't have to flag for them these trend lines. You want them to be coming to you and saying, hey, I noticed that our conversion rate, day 30 conversion rate's dipping here, here, and here. Do you have any thoughts on this? Like, they just saved you 30% of your time by calling out this is an area of opportunity for us. And now you get to do what is objectively the more fun thing, is say, let me diagnose what happened and see what it means versus just saying what happened.
That is the dream. That is. I would love it if they could.
Yeah.
Cool. So we are at 30 minutes, and I know we have a couple of questions, so I do want to save time for that. Taylor, I think you can see the questions as well, and like which ones are upvoted. They're sorted by the highest number of votes. So maybe we start with the first one. What do you think is the one overlooked skill that CFOs need to succeed in?
Yeah. We talked about it a little bit already on the storytelling side. I think that one gets lost a lot in the shuffle. Part of that, I think, is the over-reliance on dashboards, where it's like it's so easy to see the numbers. You just kind of like repeat what those numbers say, and really being able to inspire folks around it, I think, is important. The other way to think about storytelling is how to motivate action. Some of the number presentations that we do is just a here we are kind of situation, right? You've got your monthly presentation of monthly close or even to the board presentation. But really what you want to do is start to enable those actions. Again, not the weather reporting, but what are we going to do about it? And that part of storytelling then is not just, giving life to the numbers, but it's also framing it in a way that your stakeholders care about. What ultimately motivates team isn't data. It's emotion. It's what do people care about? And so if you can start to practice that framing around not only this is what the numbers say, but this is why you should care about it, you can start to see some really differentiated outcomes. If you've ever been in that situation where you're presenting, say an analysis that says that we should do X, Y, and Z, and everyone's nodding their head saying, yep, that totally makes sense, and they all leave the room and no one does anything, that was a bad story. And the reason why it was bad, it's not that they didn't understand or appreciate it, but the motivation to action against it wasn't quite there. And so spending more time on the not what happened, but what does it mean and how and why you should care about it, that's where you really start to see folks moving and starting to deliver against whatever you talk about.
Makes sense. I'm going to keep this cruising because we have 15, 20 minutes and we actually have quite a few questions. So maybe go through this one quickly because I know Luke answered it. What resources would you recommend to enhance leadership skills? Podcasts, books, mentors, etc.
All of the above. So, I think I could probably give you like a whole list of things, but I think the most important resources are probably on those, either the soft skills that we're talking about or on the other aspects of business. Like if you're supporting a product team and you don't have a great understanding how product teams work, listen to some product team podcasts. If you are supporting the marketing team and you don't really understand how sales works, there are some really great books on sales. The more you can appreciate the craft, even if you're not the one doing it, it's going to show up in the way you talk to that team. They're going to appreciate that you understand their world. And that's where it really makes a difference. In terms of leadership books and podcasts, I think the ones that I would focus on, I'll say the storytelling book again. There's a book on data storytelling, and oh my gosh, I'm blanking on it. I have a list on my website of, and this is such a stupid plug, but taylorstott.com. I have all of the books that I've really recommend to my teams. That's a really good place that has books and it's segmented by categories. So whether it's leadership or management or presentation, those are all the books I tend to throw out to my teams when they're trying to build up those skills.
I love it. Next one, how much is a CFO responsible for revenue projections?
It's a great question, and I'm thinking about an old CFO's phrase, which is, it may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility. And I think that's a good way to think about it. Like we were talking about earlier, the CFO doesn't ultimately do anything. Like they're not getting on sales calls typically. They probably do on occasion, but more of the times than not, what they are responsible for is making sure that the rules of the game are well established and the resourcing is there to support it. And so that's where the CFO can take the real accountability is if we are missing versus our plan, was it a bad plan? Were the resources not in place? And so the diagnostics and the follow-up actions to support the teams who are ultimately accountable, that's where the CFO can really step up.
Makes sense. Keep cruising. Another one just got voted. Okay. How do you handle conflict, especially when you feel your subject matter expertise is being discounted?
Yeah, this comes up a lot, doesn't it? And so the trick that I use is you use the phrase yes and. So for those of you who aren't familiar with improv theater is where you've got folks who are coming up with stuff on the fly, and what they teach all of those actors is whatever one person says, agree with it and then build upon it. So it's yes and so if you think about that in our environment, what you want to start with is, what is this person telling you that you agree with? And it might be the smallest thing, right? It might even be as simple as, we both agree that this is a problem. If you can start from where you're aligned, you can build upon it. But when you start with where you're misaligned, you're just arguing the point. And so by showing some humility and trying to find common ground, it's a lot easier to build upon that foundation than trying to build up on a shaky ground of I'm right, you're not.
Yeah. There's also this section in Chris Voss's book. It's called mirroring, specifically.
Yep.
Literally repeating what the last person said, whether or not you agree with it, but building that common trust, and people are much more open to conversation.
Yep.
Next one, what is the typical career path of a CFO? Are they mostly coming from traditional accounting, banking type backgrounds, or is it shift towards more analytical, strategic backgrounds, such as FP&A? Well, 3 questions nested in there. Well, maybe we start with that one.
Yeah. So I don't know that there's any one answer, and I don't know that I've seen any data on it, but the impression that I've got is that it is moving more towards an FP&A and analytical background because there's so much uncertainty in the world, and folks are relying on CFOs to help navigate that uncertainty. So if your background is solely in accounting, it's probably a little bit harder to play that role than if you've been in the finance world, the analytics world, even to some extent the IR world, because you've been telling those stories. So the general advice that I've heard and seen others give is, you think about the various things you need to know as a CFO: tax, IR, FP&A, accounting. You want to try and get experience in at least 3 of those areas. Not that you're an expert in all of them, but that exposure and that experience, that helps you step up into it. So if you're in just one track all the time, it's probably a lot harder to make that next jump than it is if you're able to jump around a little bit and try a couple of different flavors.
Yeah. I mean, I was talking to several CFOs for my piece, and some of them asked to be anonymous, but he said, my role looks way more like a COO these days, right? But I can't really tell that to like aspiring CFOs and youngsters. But that is very much like the hat and a completely different skill set that you need to be building from day one. It's not something that you can just learn overnight. Cool. Next question. In the first session, Rob Goldenberg from this morning from Sixth Sense said, the number one determination of customer experience is employee satisfaction. What are the best ways a CFO can impact employee satisfaction and a positive culture?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess they could give everybody more money, but that's probably not realistic. So what I would say is, the more the CFO can articulate that story, where we were, where we are, where are we going, the motivation for folks is having an appreciation of where the company is and where it's going. So oftentimes, especially as you get lower into the ranks of the company, they only see their silo, and it starts to feel like, does my job matter? Does any of this matter? Like, where is it going? And if you have this aspiring tail from the top with numbers, with data, I think that actually helps to put things into perspective. Look, everyone goes through tough times in their job. Like, no one has a job where it's like 100% perfect all the time. So what you want to do is you want to create a compelling enough narrative that helps folks get through those tough times where they're like, this is really hard, but on the other side of this, it's going to be good. We're going to be better. We're going to be stronger. And coming from the CFO, coming from someone who is generally like the numbers person, the stoic person, being able to provide that motivation, but not from a, just emotional standpoint, but also from a numbers standpoint, that really does make a huge difference. And I've seen CFOs make that transition and provide that structure underneath people where they go, oh, okay, like this is hard, but it's going to get a lot better. And I trust that guy implicitly, or that gal.
Yep. Makes sense. Next one, how can CFOs help increase monthly recurring revenue for SaaS-based companies? I think what this question is trying to get at is, how do you work with rev ops and sales ops and set the right targets to encourage like higher goals?
Yeah, another one that's tough. So part of it is the relationship building, right? Is because ultimately the CFO or the finance leader has to be that sparring partner, that challenge. Left to their own devices, most sales teams will undersell their targets because that means that people make bonuses, people are happier, they don't quit. There's a lot of things where there's a push and pull dynamic, and you can only really do that if everyone's on the same page of, again, team sport. I think the other thing is that up leveling of appreciating how the different levers work, right? What I've seen happen, especially for sales teams, is they can oversimplify the dynamics, right? Let's say for a few months we've been missing target and the call it has been the annual contract value has been lower. So they all kind of rally and say, okay, we're going to get that annual contract value up. And so the next month they do, it's double, but the deal count drops, 60% or whatever it is. So like it's still a mess. And they go, what the heck? We did it. We did exactly what you said. So appreciating, what I would call like the stress ball effect of all these metrics are in an environment together. And if you push on one, the other ones are going to be impacted, and understanding the systems aspect of all those things. The more educated those teams are and the more they can appreciate that vantage point, the more they're going to be able to help drive that. You're still going to have to push them. You're still going to have to spar with them. But I've seen that go a lot further than just like the tops down. You guys got to do more. That has, in the history of ever, never worked.
Mhm. I echo all those. I love this next question because people think you're the CFO already, Taylor. So maybe you deserve a promotion. So the question is, how do you envision yourself to be a CFO, and what has been the biggest challenging for you up until now as a CFO or the VP of Finance?
So thank you. So I guess the biggest challenge is that I'm not yet. But I think the two challenges are, one is that exposure that we talked about, right? Of just making sure that you're being able to see a lot of things. The good part about being good is you get more work. The bad part about being good at what you do is you're going to get more of the work that you're good at. And you have to really advocate for yourself to get exposure to different areas. Sometimes you have to advocate really hard. I had to do that at GoDaddy for, like I said, 8 years I was there. A lot of it was supporting that care organization. And they just kind of said, like, well, we'll just keep having you do that. And he said, no. If I do that forever, I will only ever be the care guy. And it'll be really hard for anyone to see me as a marketing partner, a sale, anything else. So I think that's the advocacy you really have to make for yourself is, where do you want to be and how do you make those strategic moves, even if it's lateral, to help you get that exposure to move up to the next level, right? It's not just one ladder and it's each rung at a time. It's, more like that chutes and ladders game where you're going across and up and down, but ultimately you're just trying to move up the board.
Yeah. I was once told, if you don't know what you want to do, you will always be told what to do, especially in finance, where you're always so no one's actually being like, oh, how are you feeling? What do you want to do? And you really have to be your own advocate, especially you want to build out your breadth.
Yep.
Next one, what advice do you have for someone looking to shift from accounting career to one in finance and FP&A and ultimately for CFO?
Yeah. So what I would say, I had to do the same thing. Like I said, I started public accounting. I left after about 3-4 years. So I'm not sure how long this person's been in it, but I'd say look for the hybrid role. When I jumped to a real estate investment trust, and it was half accounting and half finance. And I said, I'm going to do that because I don't really want to do accounting, but I'm going to get my foot in the door on the accounting side. I'm going to get exposure on the finance side. And then from there, I was able to go into an FP&A role. Candidly, I went into this real estate investment trust as a manager. When I went to GoDaddy, I took a step down in title to be a senior analyst. But that was the only way that I was going to be able to make it, to say that they weren't going to hire me as a manager of finance because I didn't really have enough experience there, but I had enough that I could be a senior analyst. And I said, you know what? I'll take the pay cut. I'll take the title cut because I know ultimately I'm going to get the experience that I want. And I think that's what I would encourage everyone to do is look for where you can leverage your strengths, but build upon it into a different area. And don't be afraid to make those lateral, even one step down moves, especially for growing companies. Where you start is not where you're going to end. There's going to be a lot of room to grow, and just get in there, make your case, and then just start building upon it.
Love it. Next one. Oh my god, this list goes longer. We can go over if you want. We really do want to go through everyone's questions. So let's go for it. Next one is on the qualities of great CFO. How much do you think this is born versus made?
I think most of it is made. Like, I don't think anyone just automatically comes out and knows how to do all this partnership stuff. It's really, really hard. Like that question earlier of like, how do you handle when you're disagreeing with someone? That happens all the time. And they don't teach you that in school or ever really. So I think it's mostly made, and I think it is being intentional about building upon not only your strengths, but your weaknesses. The advice that I give a lot of folks is don't be afraid of negative feedback, embrace it, seek it out. And again, you may not agree with all of it, but look for the kernels of truth that you can rely upon, and then say, okay, how am I going to do that? I'll give you an example. At one point, the care team at GoDaddy was really frustrated with me. They felt like all I ever did was tell them no. And at one point, one of them had said to my boss, Taylor seems to like his ideas more than ours. And my initial reaction was like, yeah, because my ideas are good and yours are not. And that was like, I caught myself and went, that's a horrible way of thinking. And I started to appreciate the reason why that probably was coming across is I didn't spend enough time thinking about their ideas and seeing where their ideas had some positivity. And really what I should see my role as is how to help them build up their ideas. And maybe it's just the kernel of the ideas, like the intention of the idea is good, but the execution's off. But if you start building from there, like it makes a difference. So like long story short, no, it's something you have to work at and you work at every day. And even now where I espouse the importance of partnership, I'm still trying to get better at it because it's really, really hard, especially in this environment where, again, a lot of uncertainty, people are tense. Sometimes you screw up and you just have to keep being humble and saying, hey, how can I do better and how can I serve you?
Yeah. And that's a good segue to the next one. Can you elaborate on your leadership experience between different company sizes and culture? And this was actually one of my questions that we didn't get to. So good one.
Yeah, it's a great one. So the core of it is the same regardless of the company size, right? Those three whats. You're answering what happened, what does it mean, and what are we going to do about it? That is the same regardless of what size company you're in. So what changes is the level of resourcing, and that's a good and a bad thing. Bigger companies, you have more structured data, but you also have more data, and sometimes more data is like overwhelming, right? You actually have to filter through and say this stuff matters and this stuff doesn't. So you have to be a lot more discerning in what you look at. Whereas smaller companies, you probably have less data than you would ideally want, so you're going to have to make some judgment calls, but you're not getting a lot of conflicting information. The other thing is bigger companies are going to have a lot more of that kids soccer where there's a lot of people coming in trying to make the decision or being part of it. Smaller companies, there's just not that many people there. So on the one hand, it's a little bit safer when there's more people because you can ideate, but the bad thing is that decisions don't get made in giant groups ever. Like one person has to make a decision, not multiple. So you actually can see a lot better decision velocity in the smaller companies. So it's all the same flavor. It's just different challenges. And I don't know that it's any are better or worse. Quite honestly, it's like a Goldilocks thing, right? Where sometimes it's too big or too small or too hot or too cold. It's really about them just finding, what challenges do you find more interesting and engaging versus what challenges do you find more draining, right? If you're the type who's like, I don't want to send a bunch of meetings, the bigger company ones are probably going to be a little bit too much. Whereas if you're like, I really don't like having to make a lot of judgment calls about data, the smaller companies are going to be hard because that's mostly what you do.
Yeah. Makes sense. We are going to cap questions, by the way. Everyone, thank you so much for your interest. I'm happy to answer some of these as well, such as a Series A funding one. Feel free to email me if you have the question. Series A usually does not have a CFO or a finance leader, and so you're not really looking for financial metrics. And so for the maybe last minute, a fun one, any good book, podcast, or tweet star for a CFO? I know who mine is.
There's so many. So the couple that I think of is one is Thinking Fast and Slow. I think that's a really, really great book about how people make decisions. It talks about how there's two systems within our brains. There's system one, which makes like quick, intuitive decisions, and system two, which is more methodical. And the way that we're wired is we tend to default to the intuitive decision making, which gets us in trouble a lot. And so if you find yourself constantly like frustrated or curious about like how things are happening, that's a really good book to illuminate just in general how people think. But the other one that I would consider is Creativity Inc. So that's the book about the founding of Pixar. Not only is it a good book, especially if you're interested in like the Disney Pixar stuff, but it's a really great book about creating an environment that fosters creativity. And obviously creativity in accounting is a totally different beast. We don't want to talk about that, but creativity in a business and like how do you create psychological safety and how do you create high performing teams? There's so many interesting aspects in there, and that's one of the ones that I highly recommend to everybody. But Megan, I'm curious, like, do you have any ones that you would throw out there?
I love the Secret CFO on Twitter. I don't know if you guys follow him. I am not paid by him, but he has great practical insights and writes on Substack as well, like navigating M&A negotiation, all that stuff. I learn something new every single time, and so it's a fun and spicy, and he's always a good one to read. Awesome. So I know we are over on time. I will conclude our session for today. The time has flown by. It's been a real blast to have everyone. A lot of great tips and learnings from Taylor. And thank you to you all for the questions from the audience. I hope you guys have all taken real value from our discussion. And lastly, if you're not part of the CFO Connect community yet, I highly encourage joining. Luke will drop in the link in the chat. Thanks again, everyone. And I hope to see everyone tomorrow for day 2 of the summit.
Nice job, guys. That was awesome.
That was so good.
Yeah, really, really good. Megan, you did a great job moderating, and Taylor, you were extremely, I would say, pointy and spiky with your answers, which is really, really good, right? Very, very tangible. So super, super good, guys. And we got some really great questions. So thank you so much.
Oh, they're muted.
Let me see if I can.
You have to unmute yourself, I think.
Oh, shoot. I don't think so. I don't know.